Kiddo, kiddo, kiddo! Hello, everybody. Hello, my lily pals. So we're back at it again. So yeah, for those who may have tuned in before, I don't remember all who was. I attempted to stream this, yes, I am here. I'm here. For those who are privy to a certain past stream within the past week, I did try to stream this game before, but it only lasted for about 20 minutes before my potato did the sudden shutdown thing, and I can only presume it's because it overheated. It was hellishly warm in my room at the time. This time, however, is a lot different. Today has been actually very, very cool, both outside and in. Currently, my laptop is only somewhat warm. I don't have the cooling pad on, otherwise you're gonna hear the fans all stream. But currently, my room is at quite a comfortable 68 degrees as opposed to the 80 degrees of last time. The goddess of chill. But anyway, I also know that that prior stream was also when I showed off my newest PNG. So some of you have already seen it, but for those who haven't, one moment. Da 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 da. Newest PNG. My casual wear. Got my hair up in a long ponytail. I got magic bubbles. And I got an embarrassing t-shirt. I figure like this kind of outfit would work pretty well for this visual novel. So for anyone who anybody who's not in the know of this visual novel and what its whole deal is, it is based on a cult classic gothic novel of the same name, Carmilla, and it's often regarded famously for being like the grandmother of all lesbian vampire stories. And this is pretty much the story that adapts it into a visual novel. However, that's not the only like sort of themes or like any of the particular subject matters that it tries to cover. I actually have the preface of the premise here on the itch.io page, which, by the way, I will post a link in chat here in case anybody is ever interested in playing this game themselves. I'd recommend it. So far, I haven't read the whole story, and like I said, the last time we only got about 20 minutes in, so like we barely even started. But anyway, I tried to explain it the first time around, but like I couldn't really explain it in quite the same fashion as the game's page could. So to alleviate that, I have it right here. I prepared. Here in a section called What Is It About? Carmilla has often been called a lesbian vampire story, which is pointing out the obvious and missing its point at the same time. On its surface, it is also a romance, a tale of bonding between two lonely girls in an isolated environment with a dash of mystery for good merit. Not far beneath this entertaining level of the story, readers who prefer their text to play the role of teacher or moralist will readily discover a lesson here. Do not allow dogmatic rationalism to replace superstition and blind you to the truth. However, at its center, Carmilla is an exploration of the human condition after the Enlightenment cemented the distinction between mind and matter, the so-called mind-body dualism, with its clear preference for mind over matter. Today, this duality is hardly ever questioned. The editors have appended a collection of notes that might serve to illustrate the birth of this new paradigm and assist in carving a path to the real heart of the story. So yeah, quite a lot of intellectual jibber-jabber in this game. But, you know, I hope y'all can at least stick around for a while for the experience. As I said, it is pretty much a cult classic, if not just a regular classic. That said, I think maybe we should get started. Open up the game here. I know it takes a little bit to open. And my PNG is much smaller than usual, just in the corner there, simply because, like, I was afraid of, like, my bubbles or, you know, just my image covering up too much of the screen and being a little too distracting. So yeah, here we have Carmilla. Let's see, that's a little strange. I can't quite hear anything. Oh. That's because, I had to switch out the batteries for my, headset, just because, like, the batteries were dying. And so in the process I had to turn off my headphones for the occasion, and I just forgot to turn them back on. So we're good now. Dogs. So yeah, anyway, for anybody to be starting over from the very beginning, again, we didn't get too far in, and it's friendly to anybody new who might pop in, relatively speaking. Just let me know, how audio sounds, if I'm too loud or if game is too quiet. Either way. But with that, I think, we should get started. Hopefully my throat can be able to take all the narration. I know it got a little achy yesterday when I was reading off all those SCP articles. But we'll see. We'll see. Let's begin. Editor's introduction. Visual, adjective. Attained or maintained by sight, visual impressions, or producing mental images, vivid. Gothic, Adjective, pejorative. Barbaric, lacking refined taste, and the vulgar. The first time I met Dr. Martin Hesselius was in exile, although his was a self-imposed one. A practicing surgeon at the time, he was dissatisfied with the materialistic worldview governing his profession and therefore decided to take an indefinite break. I, on the other hand, had recently been expelled from the convent of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, and thus forced to abandon my novitiate. Although, I must admit, the punishment was an appropriate one. It meant that I had lost not only my home, but also my calling. I haven't been quite focused ever since, and never stayed in one place for more than a few weeks. In the doctor, I found my master. We quickly bonded over our shared interests in the metaphysical and the works of Swedenborg. His knowledge was immense, his grasp of difficult ideas immensely intuitive. He was the very man to inspire a young enthusiast like me with awe and delight. My admiration has stood the test of time and separation of space. I am sure it is well-founded. After returning to his profession, Dr. Hesselius made it a point to seek out those cases which showed the least likelihood of rewarding inquiry in the hopes of furthering his theories about the relationship between the natural and the spiritual world. Often during his investigations, he would come across cases that seemed to scratch at the cloudy glass separating the two worlds. His artful documentation of these cases would be forwarded to me, so I could translate and edit them for presentation to an interesting laity. Thus, Visual Gothic was born. It is named after the duality that is inherent in the two definitions of visual cited earlier, namely sensory perception and imagination, or the tangible and the intangible. Gothic, to us, stands for a shameless artistic freedom that disregards historical accuracy, established standards, or, God beware, refined taste in favor of effect. I have appended a small collection of notes that might provide further information on a variety of terms and subjects. As we can see if we click the notes here, it's just a number of different stuff we can refer to if we ever need to. You can right-click the mouse or hit the escape button at any time for help and further options. The manuscripts, which are forwarded to me by Dr. Hessel, hiccup, some in English, some in French, but the greater part in German. I am a faithful, though by no means a graceful translator, and although here and there I omit some passages, shorten others, and disguise names, I have interpolated nothing. The first case we shall present to you is not without educational merits. Although not Gothic in its strictest sense, it presents a fine starting point for further exploration of the genre. The story may serve as a warning, not against the dangers of unrestrained flights of fantasy, but against blind rationalism. The manuscript came with the following note attached to it. Dear Ada, as I forward this case to you, I shall forestall the intelligent lady who relates it in nothing. I have therefore determined to abstain from any of my usual reasoning. Suffice to say that I believe the attached manuscript, which has its foundation in truth and nature, involves some of the profoundest arcana of our dual existence and its intermediates. Your humble servant, Martin Hesselius. Since Dr. Hesselius is withholding his usual reasoning, allow me to introduce Laura, the protagonist and narrator of our first case. Laura is undoubtedly an intelligent lady, yet, as she will repeatedly point out, she is more than that. She is rational. Despite her provincial residence, she is no victim of superstitious folkloric beliefs. And although her assurances in this regard might seem redundant at times, they serve no other purpose than to convince you, dear skeptical reader, that she is a reliable source and her testament nothing but the truth. A word of warning. At times, you might be tempted to laugh at the people in this story and their inability to see what's right in front of them. Laura lives at the height of the scientific revolution and the Age of Enlightenment, and the belief that all the world's mysteries would soon be solved is still widespread. The scientific disillusionment from which Dr. Hesselius suffers has not spread to the remote region Laura calls her home. The remote legion. Fairy tales and mythology can no longer serve to explain the world's many mysteries, and science has not filled those gaps. Laura is adept at employing strictly scientific methods to deduce those parts of the narration she has not witnessed herself. I have taken the liberty to omit her numerous references to relevant scientific literature. Yet, as more and more inexplicable occurrences present themselves, she is caught in a bind between her rational belief system and her emotions. With all the progress and benefits that the Age of Enlightenment has brought about, Laura's tale encourages us to ask whether we might have lost something valuable in the process. Science is, of course, merely one of the many lenses through which we may choose to perceive the world. Rationalism or atheism can easily turn into quasi-religions as they replace previous belief systems within the human psyche. Chapter 1. A Guest. Although we are by no means magnificent people, in Styria we inhabit a castle, or schloss. A small income in that part of the world goes a great way. Scantily enough, ours would have answered among wealthy people at home. My father is English, and I bear an English name, although I never saw England. But here, in this lonely and primitive place where everything is so marvelously cheap, I really don't see how ever so much more money would at all materially add to our comforts, or even luxuries. My father was in the Austrian service when he purchased this feudal residence, and the small estate on which it stands, a bargain. Nothing can be more picturesque or solitary. It stands on a slight eminence in a forest. The road, very old and narrow, passes in front of its bridge. Its moat is full of branches and sailed over by many swans, and floating on its surface are white fleets of water lilies. Over all this, the Schloss shows its many-windowed front, its towers, and its Gothic chapel. The forest opens in an irregular and very picturesque glade before its gate, and at the right a steep Gothic bridge carries the road over a stream that winds in deep shadow through the wood. I have said that this is a very lonely place. Judge whether I say the truth. Looking from the hall door towards the road, the forest in which our castle stands extends 15 miles to the right and 12 to the left. The nearest inhabited village is about 7 of your English miles to the left. The nearest inhabited Schloss of many historic associations is that of old General Spielsdorf, nearly 20 miles away to the right. I have said the nearest inhabited village because there is only 3 miles westward, that is to say in the direction of General Spielsdorf's Schloss, a ruined village. It has a quaint little church, now roofless, in the aisle of which are moldering tombs of the once proud family of Karnstein, now extinct. It was they who once owned the equally desolate chateau which, in the thick of the forest, overlooks the silent ruins of the town. Respecting the cause of the desertion of this striking and melancholy spot, there is a legend which I shall relate to you another time. I must tell you now how very small is the party who constitute the inhabitants of our castle. I don't include servants, or those dependents who occupy rooms in the buildings attached to the Schloss. Listen and wonder. My father, who is the kindest man on earth, and I, at the date of my story, only 19, constitute the family at the Schloss. My mother, a Styrian lady, died in my infancy, but I had a good-natured governess who had been with me from my infancy. I could not remember the time when her kind, benevolent face was not a familiar picture in my memory. This was Madame Perrodon, a native of Bern, whose care and good nature now in part supplied to me the loss of my mother, whom I do not even remember, so early I lost her. She made a third at our little dinner party. There was a fourth. Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, a lady such as you term, I believe, a finishing governess. She spoke French and German, Madame Perrodon French and broken English, to which my father and I added English. The latter, partly to prevent its becoming a lost language among us, and partly from patriotic motives, we spoke every day. The consequence was a babble at which strangers used to laugh, and which I shall make no attempt to reproduce in this narrative. Besides, there were 2 or 3 young lady friends, pretty nearly of my own age, who were occasional visitors for longer or shorter terms, and these visits I sometimes returned. These were our regular social resources, but of course there were chance visits from neighbors of only 5 or 6 leagues distance. My life was, notwithstanding, rather a solitary one, I can assure you. My gouvernante had just so much control over me as you might conjecture such sage persons would have in the case of a rather spoiled girl, whose only parent allowed her pretty nearly her own way in everything. The first occurrence in my existence which produced a terrible impression upon my mind, which, in fact, never has been effaced, was one of the very earliest incidents of my life which I can recollect. Some people will think of it so trifling that it should not be recorded here. You will see, however, by and by why I mention it. The nursery, as it was called, though I had it all to myself, was a large room in the upper story of the castle, with a steep oak roof. I can't have been more than 6 years old, when one night I awoke, and looking round the room from my bed, failed to see the nursery maid. Neither was my nurse there, and I thought myself alone. I was not frightened, for I was one of those happy children who are studiously kept in ignorance of ghost stories, of fairy tales. Of all such lore as makes us cover up our heads when the door cracks suddenly, or the flicker of an expiring candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall nearer to our faces, I was vexed and insulted at finding myself, as I conceived, neglected, and I began to whimper, preparatory to a hearty bout of roaring, when, to my surprise, I saw a solemn but very pretty face looking at me from the side of the bed. It was that of a girl who was kneeling with her hands on the coverlet. I looked at her with a kind of pleased wonder, and ceased whimpering. She caressed me with her hands, and lay down beside me on the bed, and drew me towards her, smiling. I felt immediately delightfully soothed, and fell asleep again. I was wakened by a sensation, as if 2 needles ran into my breast very deep at the same moment, and I cried loudly. The girl started back, with her eyes fixed on me, and then slipped down upon the floor and, as I thought, hid herself under the bed. I was now for the first time frightened, and I yelled with all my might and main. Nurse, nursery maid, housekeeper, all came running in, and hearing my story, they made light of it, soothing me all they could meanwhile. But, child as I was, I could perceive that their faces were pale, with an unwonted look of anxiety, and I saw them look under the bed and about the room, and peep under tables and pluck open cupboards. Then the housekeeper whispered to the nurse, "Lay your hand along that hollow in the bed. Someone did lie there, so sure as you did not. The place is still warm." Ah! Kept in ignorance of fairy tales, oh my. Hi! Thank you for the raid! Golly! Welcome to the pond. Hello, raiders. I am your beloved Issy. I am a magical girl frog. And right now we're playing a visual novel adaptation of a classic gothic story known as Carmilla, which some of you may know as the grandmother of all lesbian vampire stories. Glad to have you all stop in. Oh, no, you. You shush. You shush. Yes, I am Frog. I is hops. Thank you for the raid again. Okay, let's see. Trying to get back into the window. Okay. I remember the nursery maid petting me, and all three examining my chest, where I told them I felt the puncture, and pronouncing that there was no sign visible that any such thing had happened to me. The housekeeper and the two other servants who were in charge of the nursery remained sitting up all night. From that time on, a servant always sat up in the nursery until I was about 14. I was very nervous for a long time after this. A doctor was called in. He was pallid and elderly. For a good while, every second day, he came and gave me medicine, which of course I hated. The morning after I saw this apparition, I was in a state of terror and could not bear to be left alone, daylight though it was, for a moment. I remember my father coming up and standing at the bedside and talking cheerfully, and asking the nurse a number of questions, and laughing very heartily at one of the answers. Patting me on the shoulder and kissing me, he told me not to be frightened, that it was nothing but a dream and could not hurt me. But I was not comforted, for I knew the visit of the strange woman was not a dream, and I was awfully frightened. I was a little consoled by the nursery maid's assuring me that it was she who had come and looked at me and lain down beside me in the bed. That I must have been half dreaming not to have known her face, but this, though supported by the nurse, did not quite satisfy me. Give me some... You will come to realize, y'all, I'm fairly bashful. I remembered in the course of that day a venerable old man in a black cassock coming into the room with the nurse and the housekeeper and talking a little to them and very kindly to me. Thank you, Om the Dragon, for becoming a lily pal. I think these were the very words, for I often repeated them to myself, and my nurse used for years to make me say them in my prayers. I remembered so well the thoughtful, sweet face of that white-haired old man in his black cassock as he stood in that rude, lofty brown room. The clumsy furniture of a fashion 300 years old about him, and the scanty light entering its shadowy atmosphere through the small window. He kneeled, and the three women with him, and he prayed aloud with an earnest, quavering voice, for what appeared to me a long time. I can read. I forget all my life preceding that event, and for some time after it is also all obscure. Yet the scenes I have just described stand out vivid as the isolated pictures of phantasmagoria surrounded by darkness. I am now going to tell you something so strange that it will require all your faith in my veracity to believe my story. It is not only true, nevertheless, but truth of which I have been an eyewitness. It was a sweet summer evening, and my father asked me, as he sometimes did, to take a little ramble with him along that beautiful forest vista which I mentioned as lying in front of the Schloss. General Spielsdorf cannot come to us so soon as I had hoped. He was to have paid us a visit of some weeks, and we had expected his arrival next day. He was to have brought with him a young lady, his niece and ward, Mademoiselle Reinfeldt. I had never seen her, but had heard her described as a very charming girl, in whose society I had promised myself many happy days. I was more disappointed than a young lady living in a town or more bustling neighborhood can possibly imagine. This visit and the new acquaintance it promised had furnished my daydream for many. And how soon does he come? Not till autumn. Not for 2 months, I dare say, and I am very glad now, dear, that you never knew Mademoiselle Reinfeldt. And why? because the poor young lady is dead. I quite forgot I had not told you, but you were not in the room when I received the General's letter this evening. Here it is. I am afraid he is in great affliction. The letter appears to me to have been written very nearly in distraction. I was very much shocked. General Spielsdorf had mentioned in his first letter 6 or 7 weeks before that she was not so well as he would wish her, but there was nothing to suggest the remotest suspicion of danger. We sat down on a rude bench under a group of magnificent lime trees. The sun was setting with all its melancholy splendor behind the sylvan horizon. The stream that flows beside our home and passes under the steep old bridge wound through many a group of noble trees, almost at our feet, reflecting in its current the fading crimson of the sky. General Spielsdorf's letter was so extraordinary, so vehement, and in some places so self-contradictory that I read it twice over, the second time aloud to my father. Yet I was still unable to account for it, except by supposing that grief had unsettled his mind. It said, "I have lost my darling daughter, for as much as I loved her, or as such I loved her. During the last days of dear Bertha's illness I was not able to write to you. Before then I had no idea of her danger. I have lost her, and now learn all too late. She died in the peace of innocence, and in the glorious hope of a blessed futurity. The fiend who betrayed our infatuated hospitality has done it all. I thought I was receiving into my house innocence, gaiety, a charming companion for my lost Bertha. Heavens, what a fool have I been! I thank God my child died without a suspicion of the cause of her sufferings. She is gone without so much as conjecturing the nature of her illness, and the accursed passion of the agent of all this misery. I devote my remaining days to tracking and extinguishing a monster. I am told I may hope to accomplish my righteous and merciful purpose. At present there is scarcely a gleam of light to guide me. I curse my conceited incredulity, my despicable affectation of superiority, my blindness, my obstinacy, all too late. I cannot write or talk collectedly now. I am distracted. So soon as I shall have a little recovered, I mean to devote myself for a time to inquiry, which may possibly lead me as far as Vienna. Sometime in the autumn, 2 months hence, or earlier if I live, I will see you. That is, if you permit me. I will then tell you all that I scarce dare put upon paper now. Farewell. Pray for me, dear friend." In these terms ended this strange letter. Though I had never seen Bertha Reinfeldt, my eyes filled with tears at the sudden intelligence. I was startled, as well as profoundly disappointed. The sun had now set, and it was twilight by the time I had returned to the General's letter to my father. It was a soft, clear evening, and we loitered, speculating upon the possible meanings of the violent and incoherent sentences which I had just been reading. "Shall be on my way. I'm not much of a vision of a person." "Oh, that's fine, Ohm. Glad to have you stop by anyway." "Not the best way to tell of a death, I know." It's the whole thing about, Gothic literature, it's very seldom ever, chipper, or, there's often not much room for sugarcoating. We had nearly a mile to walk before reaching the road that passes the Schloss in front, and by that time the moon was shining brilliantly. At the bridge we met Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, who had come out without their bonnets to enjoy the exquisite moonlight. We heard their voices gabbling in animated dialogue as we approached. We joined them at the bridge and turned about to admire with them the beautiful scene. The glade through which we had just walked lay before us. At our left the narrow road wound away under clumps of lordly trees and was lost to sight amid the thickening forest. At the right, the same road crosses the steep and picturesque bridge, near which stands a ruined tower which once guarded that pass, and beyond the bridge an abrupt eminence rises, covered with trees and showing in the shadows some gray ivy-clustered rocks. Over the sward and Over the sward and low grounds, a thin film of mist was stealing like smoke, marking the distances with a transparent veil, and here and there we could see the river faintly flashing in the moonlight. No softer, sweeter scene could be imagined. The news I had just heard made it melancholy, but nothing could disturb its character of profound serenity and the enchanted glory and vagueness of the prospect. My father, who enjoyed the picturesque, and I stood looking in silence over the expanse beneath us. The two good governesses, standing a little way behind us, discoursed upon the scene and were eloquent upon the moon. Madame Perrodon was a matronly middle-aged romantic. She talked and sighed poetically. Mademoiselle de la Fontaine, in right of her father, who was a German, assumed to be psychological, metaphysical, and something of a mystic. When the moon is shining with a light so intense as it is tonight, it indicates a special spiritual activity. The brilliancy is manifold. It acts on dreams, it acts on lunacy, it acts on nervous people. It has all kinds of marvelous physical influences connected with life. My cousin, who was mate of a merchant ship, was having a nap on deck on such a night, laying on his back with his face full in the light of the moon. He awoke after a dream of an old woman clawing him by the cheek, with his features horribly drawn to one side, and his countenance never quite recovered its equilibrium. The moon this night is full of idyllic and magnetic influence. And see, when you look behind you at the front of the Schloss, how all its windows flash and twinkle with that silvery splendor, as if unseen hands had lighted up the rooms to receive fairy guests. There are indolent styles of the spirits in which, indisposed to talk ourselves, the talk of others is pleasant to our listless ears, and I gazed on, pleased with the tinkle of the ladies' conversation. I have got into one of my moping moods tonight. In truth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me, you say it wearies you, but how I caught it, found it, or came by it, I forget the rest. But I feel as if some great misfortune were hanging over us. I suppose the poor General's afflicted letter has had something to do with it. At this moment, the sudden sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. They seemed to be approaching from the high ground overlooking the bridge, and very soon the equipage emerged from that point. 2 horsemen first crossed the bridge, and then came a carriage drawn by 4 horses, and 2 men rode behind. It seemed to be the traveling carriage of a person of rank, and we were all immediately absorbed in watching that very unusual spectacle. It became, in a few moments, greatly more interesting, for just as the carriage had passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the leaders, taking fright, communicated his panic to the rest, and after a plunge or two, the whole team broke into a wild gallop together, and dashing between the horsemen who rode in front, came thundering along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. The excitement of the scene was made more painful by the clear, long-drawn screams of a female voice from the carriage window. We all advanced in curiosity and horror, me rather in silence, the rest with various ejaculations of terror. Our suspense did not last long. Just before you reached the castle drawbridge, on the route they were coming, there stands by the roadside a magnificent lime tree. On the other stands an ancient stone cross, at sight of which the horses, now going at a pace that was perfectly frightful, swerved so as to bring the wheel over the projecting roots of the tree. I knew it was coming. I covered my eyes, unable to see it out, and turned my head away. At the same moment I heard a cry from my lady friends, who had gone on a little. Curiosity opened my eyes, and I saw a scene of utter confusion. 2 of the horses were on the ground. The carriage lay upon its side with 2 wheels in the air. The men were busy removing the traces, and a lady with a commanding air and figure had got out, and stood with clasped hands, raising the handkerchief that was in them every now and then to her eyes. Through the carriage door was now lifted a young lady, who appeared to be lifeless. My dear papa was already beside the elder lady, evidently tendering his aid and the resources of his Schloss. The lady did not appear to hear him, or to have eyes for anything but the slender girl who was being placed against the slope of the bank. I approached. The young lady was apparently stunned, but she was certainly not dead. My father, who piqued himself on being something of a physician, had just had his fingers on her wrist and assured the lady, who declared herself her mother, that her pulse, though faint and irregular, was undoubtedly still distinguishable. The lady clasped her hands and looked upward, as if in a momentary transport of gratitude, but immediately she broke out again in that theatrical way which is, I believe, natural to some people. She was what is called a fine-looking woman for her time of life, and must have been quite beautiful. She was tall, but not thin, and dressed in black velvet. She looked rather pale, but with a proud and commanding countenance, though now strangely agitated. Who is ever being so born to calamity? Here am I, on a journey of life and death, in prosecuting which to lose an hour is possibly to lose all. My child will not have recovered sufficiently to resume her route for who can say how long. I must leave her. I cannot, I dare not delay. How far on, sir, can you tell is the nearest village? I must leave her there, and shall not see my darling, or even hear of her till my return, 3 months hence. I plucked my father by the coat and whispered earnestly in his ear, "Oh, papa, pray ask her to let her stay with us. It would be so delightful. Please do." "If Madame will entrust her child to the care of my daughter and of her good gouvernante, Madame Perrodon, and should she permit her to remain as our guest under my charge until her return, it will confer a distinction and an obligation upon us. We shall treat her with all the care and devotion which so sacred a trust deserves." "I cannot do that, sir. It would be to task your kindness and chivalry too cruelly." "It would, on the contrary, be to confer on us a very great kindness at the moment when we most need it. My daughter has just been disappointed by a cruel misfortune in a visit from which she had long anticipated a great deal of happiness. If you confide this young lady to our care, it will be her best consolation. The nearest village on your route is distant and affords no such inn as you could think of placing your daughter at for any considerable distance without danger. If, as you say, you cannot suspend your journey, you must part with her tonight, and nowhere could you do so with more honest assurances of care and tenderness than here. There is something in this lady's air and appearance so distinguished and even imposing, and in her manners so engaging, as to impress one quite apart from the dignity of her equipage, with the conviction that she was a person of consequence. By this time the carriage was replaced in its upright position, and the horses quite tractable in the traces again. The lady threw on her daughter a glance which I fancied was not quite so affectionate as one might have anticipated from the beginning of the scene. Then she beckoned slightly to my father, and withdrew 2 or 3 steps with him out of hearing. She talked to him with a fixed and stern countenance, not at all like that with which she had hitherto spoken. I was filled with wonder that my father did not seem to perceive the change, and also unspeakably curious to learn what it could be that she was speaking almost in his ear with so much earnestness and rapidity. 2 or 3 minutes at most I think she remained thus employed. Then she turned, and a few steps brought her to where her daughter lay, supported by Madame Perrodon. She kneeled beside her for a moment and whispered, as Madame supposed, a little benediction in her ear. Then, hastily kissing her, she stepped into her carriage. The door was closed. The footmen in stately liveries jumped up behind. The outriders spurred on, and the postilions cracked their whips. The horses plunged and broke suddenly into a furious canter that threatened soon again to become a gallop, and the carriage whirled away, followed at the same rapid pace by the 2 horsemen in the rear. We followed the cortege with our eyes until it was swiftly lost to sight in the misty wood, and the very sound of the hoofs and the wheels died away in the silent night air. Nothing remained to assure us that the adventure had not been an illusion of a moment but the young lady, who just at that moment opened her eyes. I could not see, for her face was turned from me, but she raised her head, evidently looking about her, and I heard a very sweet voice ask complainingly, "Where is Mamma?" Our good Madame Perrodon answered tenderly and added some comfortable assurances. "Where am I? What is this place? I don't see the carriage. And Matsuka, where is she?" Madame answered all her questions insofar as she understood them, and gradually the young lady remembered how the misadventure came about. Also, look at those stockings. Wowee. She was glad to hear that no one in or in attendance on the carriage was hurt, and on learning that her mamma had left her here till her return in about 3 months, she wept. I was going to add my consolations to those of Madame Perrodon when Mademoiselle de La Fontaine placed her hand upon my arm. "Don't approach. One at a time is as much as she can at present converse with. A very little excitement could possibly overpower her now. As soon as she is comfortably in bed, I thought, I will run up to her room and see her." My father in the meantime had sent a servant on horseback